No one heard him leave. That was the first thing that made it wrong. In the great estate of Black Hollow, nothing ever moved without sound. The iron gates groaned when opened. The wooden floors whispered under bare feet. Even the wind announced itself as it passed through the dead orchard beyond the walls. Silence was not natural here. Silence meant something had been taken. The master's favorite slave vanished on a night that should have been ordinary. No storm. No argument. No punishment announced at dusk. He was there at sunset, standing behind the master's chair as always, head lowered, hands folded, breath controlled. He poured wine with the same careful precision he'd practiced for years. He spoke only when spoken to. He did not flinch. He did not hesitate. He did not look afraid. By morning, his quarters were empty. First, no one panicked. Slaves disappeared sometimes. They were sold, reassigned, or quietly removed for reasons that were never explained. Questions were not encouraged. Silence kept people alive. But this was different. This was the favorite. The one the master trusted with his keys. The one allowed to walk the inner halls alone. The one spared when others were whipped. The master noticed before anyone else did. Dawn he rang for him. Once. A third time, hard enough to rattle the bell's frame. No answer. The room felt wrong immediately. The air heavier, as if it were holding its breath. The master's eyes drifted toward the door, then the window, then the shadows along the wall where the slave usually stood. Find him, the master said quietly. By noon, every corridor had been searched. The kitchens, the stables, the storehouses, the outer fields. No sign of a struggle. No blood. No broken locks. His sleeping mat was neatly folded. His spare tunic hung untouched. His sandals were gone. That last detail unsettled them. If he had been taken, he wouldn't have had time to dress. Whispers began before nightfall. Some said he ran. Others said someone helped him. A few claimed the master himself had ordered his removal and now played ignorant. But the master was furious. Not the loud, reckless kind of rage, but something colder. Something watchful. He ordered the gates sealed. No one was allowed in or out. Days passed. The master's temper worsened. Meals went untouched. Servants were punished for mistakes that had once been ignored. The halls felt tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in. At night, guards reported strange things. Footsteps in empty corridors. A door opening where no one stood. A sense of being watched from behind. Each time the master dismissed them. Until the fourth night. That was when the bell rang. The same bell the master used to summon his favorite slave. Rang once. The master froze. No one else dared move. Rang again. Low. Deliberate. As if someone unfamiliar with it was testing its sound. The master rose from his bed and went to the door himself. When he opened it, the hallway was empty. But the bell rope was still swaying. After that, the search became desperate. They combed the nearby woods, despite the old warnings about that place. The trees were dense, twisted, their roots clawing out of the ground like skeletal fingers. People avoided it unless forced. Nothing. Weeks passed. The estate returned to its routines, but something fundamental had shifted. The master grew thinner, his eyes hollowed. He began locking his doors at night, something he had never done before. Then, on the 23rd day, a shepherd from the outer hills arrived at the gates, pale and shaking. He said he'd found something. Not a body. Not a grave. Something worse. It was deep in the old quarry, where the land collapsed into stone and shadow. A place no one had reason to go. The shepherd had followed a smell at first. Not rot, but something sour, metallic, wrong. What he found made him run all the way back without stopping. When the master and his men arrived, they understood immediately why the shepherd couldn't speak. There, carved into the rock wall, was a small room that hadn't existed before. The stone was fresh. And inside were signs that someone had been living there. Neatly, deliberately, patiently. The master's favorite slave had not fled. He had been preparing. And whatever he was preparing for was not finished. The quarry had been abandoned for decades. Everyone knew that. The stone veins ran dry long ago, leaving behind jagged cliffs and hollowed walls that echoed strangely when the wind passed through. Children were warned never to go there. Animals avoided it instinctively. Even seasoned workers refused to linger after sunset. Yet the room carved into the rock was unmistakably new. The chisel marks were sharp, clean, purposeful. Whoever had done this new stone knew how to cut without collapsing the wall, how to hollow space while leaving the structure intact. This was not the work of a frightened man improvising in the dark. This was careful, measured. Inside, the air felt cooler than it should have been, as if the rock itself was breathing slowly. A single opening in the ceiling allowed a thin blade of light to fall onto the floor. Dust hung motionless in that beam, untouched by wind. There was a sleeping area first, a simple mat woven from reeds taken from the marshlands, folded neatly, torn. No sign of struggle. Beside it, a small shelf carved directly into the stone held objects arranged with unsettling precision. Cup, a dull knife, a bundle of dried roots, and the master's ring. That was when the master stepped back. The ring had never left his hand. He wore it day and night. It was a symbol of authority, of ownership, of control. Yet here it was, not stolen violently, placed, laid carefully on the shelf as if returned. No one spoke. The guards shifted uneasily, suddenly aware of how deep into the quarry they had come, how far from the safety of the estate walls. The master's voice, when it came, was hoarse. Search everything. They did. Every corner of the room revealed more questions. Marks scratched into the stone, not random but repeated symbols, carved over and over with patient hands. Some were shallow, others cut deep enough to catch a fingernail. They weren't words in any language the guards recognized. But the repetition suggested practice. Learning. Counting time perhaps. On one wall, a crude map had been etched. The estate grounds. The surrounding forest. The paths guards took during their night rotations. Details only an insider could know. At the bottom of the map, a final mark had been added later, carved deeper and darker than the rest. A single vertical line. The master stared at it longer than anything else. That night, he did not return to the estate. He ordered a camp built at the quarry. No one questioned him. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped unnaturally fast. Fires struggled to stay lit, their flames bending as if pushed by unseen breath. Shadows stretched too far, clinging to the edges of vision. That was when they heard the sound. Stone on stone. Low. Rhythmic. Coming from deeper within the quarry. The guards raised their weapons. The master stood motionless, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the carved room. The sound stopped. Minutes passed. Then a voice echoed faintly through the stone. Not shouting. Not pleading. Calm, familiar tone. The favorite slave's voice. Calling the master's name. Several guards fled on the spot. Those who remained felt something cold crawl along their spines. The voice was wrong, not weak, not frightened. Stronger than it had ever been within the estate walls. Closer. Then silence returned, thicker than before. By morning, strange things had begun to happen. Tools went missing, only to reappear stacked neatly outside the carved room. Guards swore they felt fingers brush their shoulders when no one stood behind them. One man claimed he woke to find his boots unlaced and placed beside his head. The master said nothing. He barely slept. On the second day they discovered a second chamber. Hidden behind a slab of stone that slid aside with alarming ease, as if it had been opened many times before. Inside the walls were covered completely in writing. Events that had happened within the estate. Punishments, disappearances, deaths that had been officially denied. The master recognized them all. Some of the names belonged to slaves he remembered punishing personally. Others were guards who had vanished years earlier under unexplained circumstances. At the center of the room was a shallow pit. Stained, dark. The master knelt beside it, his breath shallow. For the first time since the disappearance, something like fear crossed his face. This was not an escape. It was an archive. Record. Reckoning. That night, the master ordered the quarry sealed. No one was allowed to leave. No one was allowed to enter. And yet, as the final stones were rolled into place, one guard swore he saw a figure standing high above them on the quarry's edge. Watching. Waiting. Hands folded. Head raised. The way the favorite slave had never been allowed to stand before. The master had always believed fear was a simple thing. You applied pressure. You removed mercy. You repeated the lesson. Fear, he believed, made people predictable. But sitting outside the sealed quarry, listening to the wind scrape across stone that no longer felt empty, he realized too late that fear could also teach patience. Sleep did not come easily after that. When it did, it was shallow and sharp-edged. He dreamed of corridors that bent inward, of doors that led nowhere, of bells ringing without ropes. Each time he woke, he reached instinctively for his ring, and found only bare skin. By the third night, the guards were breaking. One claimed he heard breathing from inside the sealed quarry wall. Another swore the writing inside the chambers was changing, rearranging itself when no one looked directly at it. A young sentry was found sitting upright by the fire, eyes open, lips moving silently as if answering questions no one else could hear. The master dismissed them all. But he began to remember. Started with small things. Moments he had dismissed as insignificant at the time. The favorite slave had been quiet, quieter than the others. Not the dull silence of submission, but something watchful. He had learned routines faster than expected, memorized patterns, anticipated commands before they were spoken. The master had found that efficiency pleasing. He remembered the first time the slave had been punished, not for disobedience but for hesitation. The whip had struck once. The slave had not cried out. Instead he had looked up, just for a moment. Not with anger, with curiosity. The master had laughed then, unsettled but amused. He'd ordered the punishment stopped early. He remembered the questions that followed, asked softly while pouring wine. How long have you lived here, master? Do the guards always change at the same hour? Has anyone ever tried to leave? At the time they'd seemed harmless. Idle words from someone with nothing but time. Now they felt like measurements, calculations. On the fourth day, the master ordered the quarry reopened. The guards protested openly. The master silenced them with a look. When the stone was rolled aside, the carved room was unchanged, but the air inside was warmer now, almost comfortable. The beam of light from above no longer reached the floor. It stopped short, as if the ceiling had shifted. They entered cautiously. The shelf was empty. The ring was gone. In the writing chamber, more names had appeared. New ones. Some belonged to guards currently standing behind the master. One man collapsed when he saw his own name carved into the stone. The pit at the center of the room was no longer empty. Something dark glistened at the bottom, thick and uneven. Not liquid. Not solid. As if the stone itself had been softened and reshaped. The master felt something in his chest tighten. This was not revenge. This was preparation. That night the bell rang again. Once. From inside the quarry. The master did not answer. It rang a second time. Then a third. Each ring echoed longer than the last, reverberating through the stone until it felt like the sound was coming from inside his own skull. A voice followed. Not loud. Not angry. Patient. Master, it said. You forgot something. The master fled the quarry. He did not stop running until he reached the estate gates. He ordered them opened, then sealed behind him. For the first time in his life, he locked himself inside his own home. The estate felt wrong without the slave. Disordered. Unbalanced. Servants avoided the master's gaze. Guards doubled patrols, But their footsteps no longer fell in rhythm. Doors creaked where they never had before. On the 7th night since reopening the quarry, the master found something waiting in his study. Cup of wine, poured perfectly, untouched. Beside it a folded cloth, neatly pressed, the same way the favorite slave used to prepare his garments. The master did not drink the wine. He stared at it until dawn. By morning, the writing had appeared on the walls of the estate itself, not carved, pressed into the stone as if from the inside. Events the master had ensured were never recorded. The servants began to whisper openly now. They spoke of judgment, of balance, of the quarry becoming a mouth instead of a hole. The master tried to leave. The gates would not open. That night, footsteps echoed in the inner halls. Low, unhurried, unafraid. The master stood alone in his chamber, back against the door, listening as the steps stopped just outside. A familiar voice spoke softly through the wood. "I learned everything you taught me." The handle began to turn. The door did not open. That was the first mercy. The handle turned once, twice, then stopped, as if whoever stood outside was reconsidering. The master pressed his weight against the wood, breath shallow, ears ringing with the sound of his own pulse. No command came, no threat, only silence, and somehow that was worse. The master waited until dawn before unlocking the door. When he finally stepped into the corridor, it looked unchanged. Polished floors, high arches, the faint scent of oil and stone. Yet something felt aligned, as if the house itself had settled into a new posture overnight. Servants stood where they were meant to stand, too perfectly. When the master passed, they bowed, not hastily, not fearfully, but with a calm, measured precision he had never seen before. Their eyes did not linger. Their hands did not tremble. They moved like people who had already accepted something. The master summoned his guards. Only half arrived. Those who did looked exhausted, hollow-eyed. One had wrapped cloth around his hand as if hiding an injury. Another flinched at sounds that didn't exist. "The rest?" the master demanded. No one answered. Later that day the master discovered why. In the west wing, a part of the estate long unused, the walls had changed. Not cracked, not broken, changed. The stone bore impressions, as if something had pressed outward from within. Shapes that resembled hands, faces, open mouths frozen mid-soundless scream. Names, more names. The master recognized everyone. The missing guards, the servants who had vanished over the years, slaves sold, punished, erased. All accounted for. The master stumbled back, nausea rising. He ordered the west wing sealed immediately. The servants obeyed without question. Too easily. That night the house shifted. Doors opened where there had been walls. Corridors lengthened. Stairs led to rooms the master did not remember building. He found himself lost in his own estate more than once, forced to backtrack as if the house were gently correcting him, guiding him. The bell rang at midnight. Not the quarry bell. The estate bell. The one used to summon servants. The master did not touch it. Still it rang. Once, then twice. Footsteps followed. Not heavy. Not rushed. Measured. The master retreated into his study, bolting the door. He could hear breathing now, not from outside but from the walls themselves. A low, steady rhythm like a chest rising and falling. The voice came again. Closer. "You used to say the house remembers," it said softly. "I believed you." The master screamed for his guards. None came. By morning, the servants no longer waited for orders. Breakfast was prepared before the master rang. His clothes were laid out without request. His wine poured at the precise hour he used to prefer. Felt like mockery. Felt like ownership. He tried to punish a servant, raised his hand prepared to strike, but his arm refused to move. Not frozen. Not restrained. Simply ignored. The servant looked up at him then, and smiled. Just slightly. The master fell backward, heart hammering. That afternoon the quarry collapsed. Not violently, not suddenly. It folded inward, stone sliding into stone as if closing a wound. By evening, there was no sign it had ever been opened. Grass lay undisturbed atop the site, as if it had been sealed from the inside. That night the master dreamed while awake. He saw the favorite slave standing in the quarry chamber, older somehow, posture straight, eyes level. The walls behind him pulsed faintly, like muscle beneath skin. "You taught me structure," the slave said. "Discipline. Patience." The master tried to speak. No sound came. "You taught me how to make something last." When the master awoke, he was not in his bed. He stood in the great hall, alone. The doors were open. The servants lined the walls, silent, watching. At the far end of the hall, the favorite slave stood where the master used to sit. Not bound, not kneeling, seated. "You built this place to hold people," the slave said. "So I learned how to hold the place." The master fell to his knees. The house exhaled. The master did not remember standing up. One moment, he was on his knees in the great hall, the stone floor cold beneath him, the servants lining the walls like statues. The next, he was moving, walking, his legs carrying him forward without permission, toward the doors he had always believed were his. The favorite slave watched from the far end of the hall, not smiling, not threatening, simply observing. That was what broke the master most. Not hatred, not revenge, control. The doors opened as the master approached them. Welcoming. The morning light spilled in, warm and ordinary, carrying with it the distant sounds of the world beyond the estate walls. Birds, wind, life continuing as it always had. For a brief, fragile moment, hope surged. He stepped outside. The gate stood open. No guards blocked his path. No chains clinked behind him. The road stretched ahead, familiar and unchanged. The same path he had ridden countless times, the one that led away from Black Hollow and into lands where his name still carried weight. He took one step, then another. The third step never landed. The ground shifted, not collapsing, rearranging. The road curved subtly beneath his feet, bending inward, redirecting him without resistance. He turned sharply, trying to correct his path, but the landscape itself seemed to refuse him. Trees leaned just enough to block his view. Stones rose where there had been none. The estate was behind him again, closer than it should have been. The master spun around, breath ragged. He ran. Each time he tried a different direction, the same thing happened. Paths folded. Distances shortened. The estate remained at the center, patient and unmoving, like the hub of a wheel he could not escape. By the time he collapsed at the gates again, his lungs burned and his hands trembled. The favorite slave stood there now. Close enough that the master could see the changes. The slave's face was calmer than it had ever been. The constant tension, the careful restraint, was gone. His eyes were clear, focused. His posture no longer bent inward. "You always said the world belonged to you," the slave said. "That everyone in it had a place." The master tried to speak, to command, to plead. His voice failed him. The slave gestured, and the gates closed behind the master with a soft, final sound. That night, the estate showed him everything. Rooms he had forgotten, cells he had sealed, spaces behind walls where people had waited in darkness for days before dying quietly. The house guided him through them gently, relentlessly, as if ensuring he understood the full shape of what he had built. The walls whispered as he passed. Not voices, memories. He saw faces he had dismissed, heard cries he had ignored, felt the weight of time pressing inward, compressing years of cruelty into something dense and suffocating. When he tried to look away, the house corrected him. When he tried to stop, the floor carried him forward. By dawn the master was hollow. The servants no longer pretended. They moved freely now, speaking in low voices, exchanging glances that held no fear. They did not look at the master unless necessary. When they did, their eyes were distant, as if he were already becoming part of the walls. In the great hall, the favorite slave waited. "The house listens to me," he said. "Because it listened to you." The master shook his head weakly. "I didn't teach it mercy," the slave continued. "So it doesn't understand why you're asking for it now." That afternoon, the master was given quarters. Stone. Windowless. Clean. A mat lay folded on the floor. A cup rested beside it. The same arrangement the slave had once been given. The door closed without a lock. It didn't need one. Days passed. Or perhaps only hours. Time behaved strangely now. Meals arrived when the master was hungry, not when bells rang. Sleep came whether he wanted it or not. The house decided everything. Sometimes he heard footsteps outside his door. Sometimes a voice spoke softly through the stone, explaining things. Lessons. Structure. Balance. "You taught me patience," the voice said once. "I've been practicing." The master screamed until his throat bled. The house absorbed the sound. The master stopped screaming when he realized no one was listening. Not because they couldn't hear him, but because the house already knew. The silence that followed was not empty. It pressed in from every direction, thick and deliberate, as if the stone itself were waiting for him to understand something important. The master lay on the mat, staring at the ceiling he could not touch, measuring time by his own breathing. Some point the voice returned. Not from the door. From everywhere. "This place was never just a house," it said calmly. "You told me that once. Do you remember?" The master closed his eyes. He did remember. He had said it proudly years ago, walking the halls with a guest. He had spoken of foundations, of permanence, of how walls could outlast generations if built correctly. How people passed through, but stone remained. The favorite slave had been there, walking behind them, listening. "You said it was designed to contain," the voice continued. "To hold things in. To make escape difficult." The master swallowed. He felt the walls shift slightly, not moving closer, but becoming more attentive. "You made it very good at that." The next time the door opened, it was daylight. The favorite slave stood in the threshold, hands folded behind his back, posture relaxed. He did not enter. He did not need to. "The house doesn't want you to disappear," he said. "It wants you to stay." The master laughed weakly, the sound cracked and broken. "You're wrong," he whispered. "You don't understand what you've done." The slave tilted his head. "I understand perfectly," he said. "I lived inside it." He stepped aside. The corridor beyond was not the same one the master remembered. The proportions were wrong. Too narrow. Too tall. The walls curved inward subtly, guiding movement without force. The master was led through the estate again. But this time he was not shown the past. He was shown the system. Rooms that fed into other rooms. Corridors that allowed observation without being seen. Hidden passages that let one person move while others remained trapped. The design was elegant, cruel, efficient. "You built a place where people could be watched without being acknowledged," the slave said. "So I let the house watch you." They passed a chamber where servants worked quietly, organizing records carved into stone tablets. Everything that had once been erased was now meticulously preserved. "What is this?" the master asked hoarsely. "Continuity," the slave replied. "So nothing like you happens again." The master stopped walking. "And me?" he asked. The slave looked at him then. Not with hatred. With finality. "You are part of the structure now." That night the master dreamed of weight. Not pain. But as if layers of stone were being added slowly, carefully, around him. Supporting him. Holding him upright. Preserving his shape while removing his movement. He woke unable to stand. Unable to scream. The house had learned restraint. Days or weeks passed. The master's body weakened, but he did not die. Food came. Water came. Sleep came. Always enough. Never more. The slave visited occasionally. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he only listened. "The house asked me what to do with you," he said once. The master's eyes widened. "It doesn't like waste," the slave continued. "Neither do I." On one visit, the slave brought the ring. He held it up, letting it catch the light. "You thought this meant ownership," he said. "But it was just a signal." He pressed the ring into the stone wall. The stone softened, accepted it. The house hummed low and satisfied. After that, the master began to feel distributed. His awareness stretched thin, diffused through corridors and rooms. He felt footsteps before they happened, heard whispers before mouths moved. He knew when doors would open. He could not act, only witness. The house had made him useful. Years passed before anyone came looking for the master. Black Hollow did not announce its change. No smoke rose. No screams carried beyond the hills. The estate simply endured. From the outside it looked quieter, better kept. The fields were tended. The walls repaired. The gates opened when travelers approached and closed when they left. Rumors began slowly. Merchants spoke of an estate where servants were calm and efficient, where no one raised their voice, where business was conducted fairly and without cruelty. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was blessed. A few claimed the master had died and his household had simply learned to function without him. Eventually, authority noticed. A magistrate arrived first, escorted by armed men and burdened with paperwork. He expected resistance. What he found instead unsettled him more. The gates opened before he announced himself. A former slave greeted him politely and asked his business. The magistrate demanded to see the master. The man paused, then nodded. "Of course," he said. "Please follow." They were led through halls that felt strangely balanced. No clutter. No wasted space. The air was cool, steady. The magistrate felt watched, though he saw no guards. When he asked about them, the guide replied simply, "They are where they are needed." The master's chamber was empty. No bed. No desk. No signs of habitation. Only stone. The magistrate felt a flicker of unease. "Where is he asked. The guide considered the question carefully. "He is here," he said. "Everywhere." The magistrate laughed nervously and ordered a search. They never finished it. Men became disoriented, separated by corridors that bent unexpectedly. Doors led back to places they had already left. One soldier swore he heard instructions whispered directly into his ear, guiding his steps. By nightfall, the magistrate ordered a retreat. Only half his men returned to the gate. None would speak of what they'd seen. Word spread faster after that. Travelers avoided the road near Black Hollow. Children dared each other to listen at its walls. Old people claimed the house had a heartbeat if you stood close enough. And sometimes, on quiet nights, a bell could be heard ringing once. Years later, scholars arrived. They came with instruments, maps, theories. They studied architecture, geology, acoustics. They found nothing they could explain. The stone was ordinary. The design ingenious but not supernatural. Yet none of them stayed long. One left behind a journal. In it, he wrote that the estate felt less like a building and more like a memory given shape. That he felt observed not by eyes, but by intention. He never returned to retrieve it. Inside the estate, life continued. The favorite slave no longer called that, aged slowly. Or perhaps time simply treated him differently now. He walked the halls as one might walk through their own thoughts. The house listened, learned. Sometimes it asked questions. When a new servant arrived, the house observed how they moved, how they spoke, how they treated others. Patterns formed quickly. Corrections happened quietly. No whips, no chains, just adjustment. Deep within the walls, the master remained. Not conscious as he once was. Not unconscious either. He understood now. He felt the flow of the estate like blood through veins. He felt fear when it approached and satisfaction when balance returned. He had become what he once believed he controlled. A warning. Structure. A lesson that could not be ignored. On certain nights, when the wind was right, travelers claimed they heard a voice layered beneath the stone. Not begging, not screaming, teaching. The master no longer knew where he ended and where the house began. The walls breathed around him. Floors shifted subtly under his weight. Corridors whispered in patterns only he could recognize. He felt every footstep, every voice, every heartbeat within the estate. It was no longer a building. It was a living memory, a reflection of every choice he had ever made. He could not move beyond it. Escape was impossible. Yet he did not panic. Not anymore. Panic would have been futile. Time had taught him that much. The favorite slave, no longer a slave, no longer bound by fear, moved freely throughout the estate. His presence was calm, deliberate, the way a conductor moves among musicians who already know the song. He did not need to speak for the house to act. He did not need to touch for it to obey. All it required was his intention. The master remembered a lesson he had tried to teach long ago. Control is everything. Now he understood.